the next thing we wanted to talk about was the Utah Jazz. A consistent playoff team over the past couple of years. Like Donovan Mitchell seems to have turned into a legit star. That playoff series last year against the Nuggets was probably one of my favorites of the playoffs. I think they were like two of the only players to have 50 points in like three playoff games in the same series, and they're both under 25. Like,
Mhm.
makes you excited for the future of the league. At the same time, though, Utah, there are question marks. I think the big one is just kind of what is like. This is kind of combining two things we like to do with teams on this show, but like, where's this going for Utah? Is what I'm trying to say. Because at some point, this iteration of them is solid second round exit. We don't have a lot more. Now, obviously, last year, this team with a likely starting lineup of, well, last year they didn't have Bojan Bogdanovic in the bubble, but this team was good enough to get up 3-1 on Denver, who then wound up making a conference finals run. So, like, they clearly have something. But I just wonder, like, how many years are you just beating your head against the wall with the Mitchell, Gobert, and now Conley core?
Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, especially because like last year was supposed to be the year they would make a surprise run with Conley coming in and teams taking a year to figure things out. Didn't happen, and those teams are only going to get more cohesive. You would think. So I wonder just how long Utah holds on to this core. I don't want to get too like, oh, they have to trade Rudy Gobert because I don't think they do. Like I think it's Utah. I think you're not automatically going to print money with local TV deals or tickets in that market. So I think you're fine just being like, yeah, we've got a team people want to come to see, and we can, grind out a nice profit year over year with them. But from a basketball perspective, I kind of wonder if this team hasn't hit its ceiling already. Because, like, for as good as they were in those first four games against Denver last year, Denver adjusted and it was over for Utah. Like,
Yeah.
pick and roll with Gobert stopped working as well. Defensively, things kind of fell apart. Conley didn't look as good as he once did, which kind of doesn't make you feel great, especially after what they gave up for him. But I will say, I kind of think there is a lot to like on Utah. Like, despite how much I am saying they might have peaked already, I think there is some value in the consistency they have. Like, we talked at the start of this episode about how there's that kind of like strong middle class of teams. They're right in there. Like they're up there with Dallas, Portland, New Orleans. I'm leaving someone out. Like the Rockets could be, but my point being, they are the team in that middle class with the fewest things they need, with the fewest moving parts right now. Like this is a team that returns their entire starting lineup from last year. Their best player is like 24 right now and will likely only get better this year. Rudy Gobert is a two-time defensive player of the year. You know what you have in him, and you know it's really good. And they could easily get into a first-round matchup with like a Portland or a Houston and win that.
Mm-hmm.
And then in general, just give a lot of teams trouble. Like if you're running the Gobert-Mitchell pick and roll at Portland, who's stopping that? Like Nurkic is good, but you're going to be able to get some points off that. I think they have some versatility offensively. I think they're really good defensively, which is a question mark for a lot of teams. But I think ultimately their biggest strength is just that all of these players have played together already in a conference where not a lot of teams can say that.
And even their biggest addition of the offseason was someone who's played with them before. They got Derek Favors back,
Yeah.
who I think will actually be a great fit for them now, like maybe a better fit than he was a couple of years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Just because we've kind of, I believe from what I remember, Favors was a pretty high draft pick.
He was. I think like top 5 got traded for Darren Williams.
Yeah. So I think that pressure's off of him. The pressure of like, you were a top 5 pick for us, we need you to play well, is kind of gone. I think now it's like, you are going to be our backup big. And
Yeah.
he signed there knowing that.
Yeah.
And I think the fit's a lot better for him now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, I mean the ceiling for this team, not to jump to that, but I think
right ahead.
it's it's almost determined by their offense. Like because I think the
Yeah.
defense, yeah, I mean it's really good. I mean Conley's definitely probably lost a little bit of a step, but he's still solid.
Yeah.
Um, Rudy is one of the best defensive anchors, or the best defensive anchor, sans Giannis or AD
Yeah.
in the league, probably.
Yeah. Like the
Um,
best non-alien
yes.
anchor of defense.
Um, Ingles and Bohan, both great shooters. Neither of
Really good,
them,
just 3-and-D role players.
yeah, neither of them like complete sieves on defense. Like Royce O'Neal, who I'm sure is going to be like getting, some of the maybe the fifth or sixth most minutes on this team. Another guy who's just
Uh-huh.
like hard working player who's an amazing defender. Like that's kind of their roster.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then they have Jordan Clarkson, who like I think and I don't mean that as like as much of a joke as in the way that I said it, because he
uh-huh.
like has a role on this team as
Yes.
go get a bucket because not a lot of other guys on this team can.
Because
And
look around you, who's going to do it right now?
because and I think this is a great spot for him. I like Jordan Clarkson. I like that they re-signed him. I know that was kind of I think a somewhat controversial um, signing to bring him back. But I think he works for this team. You
Mhm.
can put four good defenders around him, and it's fine that he's out there.
Yeah,
Um,
especially because like he's probably a we need to steal some minutes for Donovan to be on the bench guy.
yeah. Um,
Um,
so Tom, if everything breaks right, where do you think this team ends up?
I think if everything goes well, like if Donovan takes the step forward that we were all told he was going to take last year, I don't know if you remember, but I distinctly remember people saying he looked like Dwayne Wade in 2006,
Hmm.
which felt like a lot to put on a young player. Of course, he delivered in the playoffs, so he has that gear. Um, if he takes the leap that we think he could, I could see this team being like a 3 or 4 seed in the West. I don't think they're going to get to a point where they're better than either LA team,
No.
but like 3, 4 seed, surprise Western Conference finalist, depending on like what the seeding winds up being. Um, it's possible because like
Yeah.
they do have the pieces to give a lot of these teams trouble, and even like I think we look at Rudy Gobert in like playoff situations and think, oh well, teams will be able to exploit him, but really the only like if they run into the Clippers, I feel like they could give the Clippers a lot of problems because the Clippers don't have that big on their roster that can kind of run kind of make him irrelevant.
Yeah.
Like
I think too often we kind of get into these like the NBA discussions kind of get in these conversations of like bigs being unplayable in series, specifically when there's an awful matchup.
yes.
Who can reliably guard Jokic or Davis? Is there anyone in the Western Conference bigs who can do that? The person who can reliably guard Jokic is probably Davis.
Hmm.
So like I just think you shouldn't like we people shouldn't have given Gobert such a hard time for how well Jokic played in those last three games because
Yeah.
like he's Nikola Jokic. He's one of the most unique and talented NBA players. Like
Yeah. Like I think Rudy Gobert is very much a victim of the way we talk about basketball,
yeah,
and I think he can still really control. He can manipulate the flow of a game defensively in a way
yeah,
that very few players can. Um, I forget what I was going to say. I had something to follow that up, but I lost it. But I think you're correct though. Like we get into a lot of these conversations as if there is sort of that perfect player that exists when it doesn't. Like at some point, Jokic is Jokic, AD is AD. They're going to get their points because they're that good.
yeah,
But Rudy Gobert is about as good as you can do for defending them or defending a team that doesn't have one of them.
yeah,
I also, a note on the favors thing, I really like it because I think it avoids what we see a lot of the time with teams that build a lot of their stuff around their bigs. Like you saw this with the Sixers in the playoffs a couple years ago. It avoids that kind of gulf when he goes off the court,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh well, Gobert's off the court, and a lot of our defensive schemes are built around him being that good. We don't have a backup who is. I think Favors shores that up a little bit.
Mhm.
So I think best case scenario, 3-4 seed, Western Conference finalist, losing to probably the Lakers.
Same. I
But I
think,
think they could beat the Clippers in a 7-game series. I
yeah,
don't
I
think that's
mean,
ridiculous to say.
based on how close we think this playoffs is going to be, these 3 through 8 seeds,
Mm-hmm.
it's a really good chance they could be the 3 seed. Maybe they're only up on the Nuggets by like a half a game or a
That
game,
counts.
but they're still the 3 seed. I mean,
Yeah.
how many? I was thinking a lot about this when I was trying to think about where to tier the Jazz.
Yeah.
How many teams in the West have 8 players that you are like, I think I trust them, they know their role, and they're good? Because the Jazz are one of them. They have
Yeah.
Conley, Mitchell, Ingles, Bohan, Rudy, Royce O'Neal, Jordan Clarkson, and Derek Favors.
Yeah. They're coming into the year knowing their playoff rotation.
Yeah.
It's probably what, like the Lakers. Like I don't know if we'd probably put the Clippers on that list, right? But like I don't
Yeah.
think I'd say Dallas.
No.
I don't think I'd say Portland. I think they fall apart around like 6-7.
Yeah. I know
Um,
it's tough to find.
Denver probably doesn't. Like it's tough to find a team with this much
Yeah,
cohesion,
Denver's hurt by the Grant loss.
which we will discuss. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
Um,
I like the Jazz a lot this year. I think I like them every year. I
yeah.
think I always I've been very high on this Jazz team for the last couple of years. I always think they're going to be like, you know, I don't know. I want them to take that leap.
Yeah.
I do think though that this year might be one of those like reckoning years of like, all right, if they get out in the second round again,
Mhm.
then it's like, all right, let's do some reshuffling. Um,
Yes. I think the floor for them is scary because it probably leads to breaking up this cohesion. In a similar fashion to I feel like what the Toronto Raptors were a few years ago,
hmm,
where it's like, ah, you know, like we just keep getting bounced by LeBron. At some point, this like this extensive bench rotation that we love to run and go 10 deep in playoff games doesn't really carry us anywhere.
yeah,
And if you look at like what the floor for this team might look like actually in a game, like it could be as simple as like, well, Mike Conley isn't a guy you can rely on in the playoffs anymore, or Gobert doesn't carry anything offensively. Like
it,
it's hard to imagine a floor for this team that doesn't include like taking a hard look at what a lot of their players
yeah. I think
are.
the floor is determined would is because of a lack of good offensive options, really.
Yeah, yeah.
Lack of guys who can make a play. It's really just.
Oh yeah,
I mean, Conley is like not. He's never been great at it, and he's gotten
no,
worse at it. It's really just Mitchell and Clarkson who can
yeah.
initiate this offense, and sometimes they let and Ingles. I shouldn't leave him out. They let him bring up the ball a lot. He averages like 3 or 4 assists every year. He's like decent for a guy his size. But
But
after
even then,
that,
yeah. I mean, you talk about initiating this offense, like down the stretch in playoff games, it's just Donovan's coming up with the ball,
yeah,
he's getting a pick, and we're seeing where this goes. Like they don't have a second move after that, really.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I think I like Utah a lot this year. I think they could give a lot of teams trouble. There's also a chance that they wind up in trouble. Now, speaking
mm,
of teams that give teams trouble, though, you did a lot of prep on the Phoenix Suns this year. They're obviously an interesting one with that 8-0 run in the bubble, failing to get them into the playoffs, but definitely getting them into like the national picture a little more.
mhm.
What'd you see in your deep dive on the Suns?
I see now. I really like this team.
Really?
That's what I came away with. Um, the thing is you're relying. The thing here, I'll start with some things I don't like that can kind of
Okay. Yeah.
determine how
Let's
good they're
drive
going to
off
be.
negativity a bit.
Yeah. Um, you're relying a lot on some young guys. And I'm not even talking about Aiton and Booker, because Booker is what, year 5 now. I don't think I consider him a young guy anymore. He is
Yeah, I feel like
a
Book is proven.
yeah. Aiton is, I guess, more in that category. And I do think if I were to make a list of like the 3 or 4 most like intriguing X Factor type players in the Western Conference, I think I'd put Aiton as one of them because if Aiton plays the way he did after his suspension last year with the increased defensive IQ and effort and like some great offensive efficiency that I feel like isn't talked about enough, I think this team's
Mhm.
gonna be really good. Um,
Yeah,
your your lineup is probably gonna look like um, Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, Jay Crowder, and DeAndre Ayton. And
yeah, that's a good five.
that's a really good five. I mean, Bridges, again, another young guy you're hoping gets better. Um, but
Yeah,
Bridges has already shown great skill as a 3-and-D guy, and we're seeing similar things with like Cam Johnson, who's another young
Mhm.
guy that they have to rely on as a role player. Um,
Yeah,
but they're just relying on those guys as a role player. And I think they have this weird kind of mix of vets and young guys that actually makes sense and they have some good fits together, I think. I mean, your weaknesses might be no playmakers really off the bench. So you might have to try to figure out a way to have one of CP3 or Booker on the court at all times. But I think you can do
yeah.
that. And backup bigs are a little rough. You have Damian Jones. They drafted Jalen Smith.
They still got
Um,
Dario Saric, right?
yeah, they have Dario Saric. So they also added, and this is where I was really starting to like what they did. So I was kind of looking
Yeah.
at this team and thinking like, all right, there's a lot here. You got great playmaking from CP3. I mean, elite playmaking from CP3. Very good from Booker.
Oh yeah.
3-and-D galore between Bridges and Johnson and Crowder. Um,
Uh-huh.
Unique type of big man in Aiton who is hopefully takes a step defensively.
Mhm.
And then I was thinking like, what shooters do they have on this team? But they added this summer,
A
they
lot.
added Etuan Moore, great shooter, and they
Yeah.
added Langston Galloway, great shooter. Both guys shot
Former Nick.
39%. Former Nick. I think he was like a really good Nick for a couple weeks, right?
Oh
Or
yeah,
like a
yeah. There
couple
was a point
months.
where we were very excited about Langston. It was
um,
shortly after the Landry Fields administration. Um, but in any event, yeah, no, they do have a lot of good shooters around this team that I feel like can make this offense flow a lot more smoothly.
yeah. So I'm looking at this team, and I might be crazy, um, but I genuinely think that they're one of those teams that has 8 guys that I trust. Um, you got CP3, Booker, Bridges, Crowder, Aiton. You're at 5.
Yeah,
Um, so here's where the debates come in. Do you trust Cam Johnson? He was very good last year as a rookie. Very good role player. Let's see
yeah,
where it comes. Let's see where it goes. I trust guys
yeah,
like Moore and Galloway. They're vets. They know what to do when they come in. So we're
yeah.
at like 7.5 here. Um, and then we have Dario Saric, who is like
I trust.
I trust. And
Yeah,
now we're at
like
8.5. And like I think, I mean, how many teams can you say have this good mix of guys? I mean, and if Jalen Smith is a good contribution right away,
yeah,
I mean, again, I hesitate because you're relying so much on a lot of young guys. But you
yeah.
got Chris Paul steadying the field. He is in charge. And I
Mhm.
think we're going to see career years from Booker and Aiton. Maybe even a guy like Crowder. I mean, can you? I
I
mean,
don't think that's far fetched.
yeah,
Like we saw it last year with Chris Paul and OKC too. Like he just knows how to make a team run.
yeah,
Like last that Thunder roster last year was Chris Paul, Shea, Steve Adams, Gal. Like it was Chris Paul and a lot of role players, and he made that team work. Like if you look at their best lineups from last year, he was in like 7 out of their best 8.
Yeah.
When he's on the court, he knows how to keep a team in place, running smoothly, and I feel like it's not a bad idea to bet on him doing that again.
Yeah, I mean, the rest of these guys, the other guys on this team are better than the other guys on the Thunder. And
Yeah.
the fit makes more sense. There's more offensive talent. You'll probably have, I mean, CP3 might be more at that 18, 19 level, but you're going to have 3 guys who are close, who are 20 a game probably.
Yeah.
And then a lot of super solid role players. I mean,
Yeah.
you just got a guy who was playing like 40 minutes a game in finals games in Crowder. Like, these are experienced guys.
He's a good piece.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to like about the Suns team. What do you think the peak is for this team if they get there? What do we look back on and say, wow, the Suns really knocked it out of the park this year?
Okay, so this is my I yesterday I messaged Tom saying I had a hot take.
This is the one?
Yes.
I've been very excited to hear this, and okay, lay it on me. I'm so excited to react.
So I was looking at this team, and as you can tell by the way I've been talking about them, I like them so much more than I thought I did. So I genuinely think we could be looking at a like Nuggets type situation from last year. So we're in they're in the conference finals because they didn't have to play the Lakers to get there, essentially.
Actually, don't hate it. Like, I think because I don't know. I think especially with Devin Booker being probably we can debate Booker versus Chris Paul as far as who's the best player on that team, but like Devin Booker being your number one offensive option, like he's so suited to that playoff style of play, where it's just very half court and it's very like, all right, we're gonna isolate you in the sense of like it's hard to just scheme up shots for nobodies. Like at some point you have to be able to go get a bucket, and Book can get one.
Yeah,
easily.
and
like
I was looking, and we were talking before about some of these random guys who are kind of stuck on the Thunder.
Mhm.
Let's say you're the Suns and you're having a great season, and you're at the trade deadline, and you call up Presti and you say, "I'll give you some future first with a protection on it or whatever, because I know you're gonna, not gonna accept anything less than that for George Hill." So now we got backup point guard George Hill. Maybe someone like, I don't know, someone. Trying to think of a good buyout candidate. It's kind of hard to come up with one on the top of my head. But
Hassan, like he's not a great defender, but
who?
he's a big body that you can.
Hassan, yeah. Oh,
Like if he gets bought out by the Kings,
yeah.
or I don't know, if he's unhappy, like
Or
he
Dwight
could be a
Howard.
fit. Yeah.
Or like, I don't know, maybe you aren't so sure about Bridges because you're like, how much are we trusting this guy? Can you go grab a
Bogdan.
a Bogdan?
Like we've talked about the possibility that the Hawks sign those guys to trade them.
Yeah.
If they do, and they're sitting there at the deadline saying we would like to flip them and we would like young pieces in return, the Suns have that.
Yeah. Or a Bohan.
They could also sit pat. That's true, actually. They
could also be a good fit.
They could also just sit pat and be fine, though, and that's kind of a good spot for them to be in. Like,
they're in a great spot. They can add to this team pretty easily, I think. And yeah, I'm excited about them. I think they're going to be good, and I will happily, not happily, but I'm fine with being being seen as a fool with this Western Conference Finals idea, but I would rather be high on this team because I really like Chris Paul, and I think this is probably one of the most talented teams he's played on in a while.
No, I don't think you're wrong in that at all.
Well, he played on that Rockets team. That was only a little while ago, so.
Yeah, we're not too far. It's surprising how not far. Like that feels like a million years ago.
Yeah.
It was like 3 seasons, 2 seasons. It was not long ago. So
So,
what's the worst way this could go? Coming off the potential conference final Suns.
I still think they're no matter what. I think they're a solid playoff team, but maybe they're in like the sixth or seventh spot. And I think
Okay.
that happens if we get some just like regression from some of these young guys.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a a Cam Johnson not looking great or Mikal Bridges not looking great shortens your rotation pretty quickly. And then you're going to have to trust, I don't even know. And then maybe you got to make moves. So
Yeah.
I think also it's a lot of Aiton's, whether his second half was real.
Or if that
Um,
was a fluke.
yeah. So I think those things, if his second half was not real, if that was a fluke, yeah, maybe sixth or seventh seed.
All right. Still, a lot of things looking up in Phoenix in a way that they have not in a while. So, I mean, a lot of things to be excited about. Um, Now, coming off of your talk of a Denver Nuggets situation, teams that surprisingly make Western Conference Finals, we're not transitioning into the Nuggets with this, although that would have been perfect. I actually did want to talk about the Portland Trailblazers, another
Hmm.
team that made some interesting moves this offseason. Um, they added Rocco. They brought back Melo. Um, brought back Rodney Hood. Gary Trent. I think there's a lot to like about this team. Um, they can run a lineup of Dame, CJ, Rodney Hood, Rocco, and Nurk at you, which actually feels like that might be the best lineup that Portland has had in the entire like Dame CJ era.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, if you think about it, like 2 years ago in the Western Conference Finals, they were bringing out like, or 3 years ago in the semis against Golden State, they were bringing out like Alfred Gamino and Mo Harkless.
Hmm.
And now they've upgraded that. Like Rocco is an incredibly versatile defender. He can shoot from three. Rodney Hood was at times in that conference finals against the Warriors and that semis against the Nuggets 2 years ago, like looked like one of the best players on the floor.
Yeah, very odd little streak of games from him those years. But yeah, he's got
Yeah,
a lot of talent.
like there's a lot of pieces on this Portland team, and I think the thing that I said to you a lot during the playoffs last year was just it didn't look like they had any moves. Like against the Lakers, it was just all right. We're going to keep running Dame and CJ, basically either an ISO or a pick and roll, and just hope they can get a shot off because we really don't have a lot else we can do.
Yeah.
I feel like they've got moves now. Like obviously Gary Trent's back. They brought in Ennis Cantor, who I think is going to help them. Like even though obviously his defensive limitations are pretty clear, there were times in the playoffs last year for Boston where he was a spark plug off the bench. I think there was a time where he spurred like a 10-0 run for them against the Heat. Like he can do that. So he's an offensive option they didn't have last year. They
Wait,
brought
who?
back Melo, who has Ennis Cantor.
Oh, right. Sorry.
Yeah, I started talking very fast there. They brought back Melo, who like I will yell about Melo having value until I am blue in the face, and then continue to yell about it some more because I think he is a player that NBA teams can use in the playoffs. We saw it last year. There was a stretch in like the second half of a playoff game where Melo ran isolation 4 straight
Hmm.
possessions and scored on all of them. And it wasn't even Melo like taking over a game and going rogue or something like that. It was like, no, we need this because Dame and CJ are exhausted and cannot physically run a pick and roll right now. So I think like Melo's an option. I think they have the potential to go small if they want to with like a. Sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. Yeah, small if they want to with like a Dame, CJ, Gary Trent, Rodney Hood, and then Rocco at the small ball 5. Um, if you want, you can go Dame, CJ, Rodney Hood, Melo at the 4, Rocco at the 5. Like
Hmm.
you have options. At the defense would be suspect at best, but I would watch the hell out of
Oh, yeah.
it.
And Rocco is an experienced center now.
Yeah, he's officially his listing on the team roster has officially moved from forward to forward/center. That's when you know. But I think like there's a lot to like. I think if I had to pick some shortcomings, it's the fact that there's not really much of a ball handler off the bench, not much of a creator off the bench for them. Um, After Nurk, their big defense is suspect, as we just referenced. Um, I kind of think this, like, at a certain point, the Dame CJ Blazers teams are just always going to be in this spot of like, who is your third guy?
Yeah.
Can you stop a big from getting a bucket down the stretch? And do you have bench production? Because it's 3 years now of, well, we don't really have wings who can shoot, so the floor kind of lost some spacing. Oh well, we added wings that can shoot. Now we don't have anybody that can get their own shot though.
Yeah.
Like it's just, if it ain't one thing, it's another because they're so heavily invested in their backcourt.
Do you think we'll see any like Simons or something out there?
I kind of hope we do because like or around like that couple weeks before the season last year, there was this weird media blitz of like, actually the Blazers are incredibly high on Anthony Simons, and it was very weird then. It's still weird now, especially because you didn't really see the court last year, which like might just be an issue of him not being ready. Like you can like what you see from a guy in practice and still think this isn't ready for a game. That happens, but I would hope so because I think the only way for Portland to really like redefine its ceiling here is for one of those young players, like whether it's Simons, Zach Collins, Nasir Little, like one of those guys to take a leap on a rookie contract that we didn't see coming. Because otherwise, it's just going to be more of which role players can we cobble around them, and probably like consistent second round exits for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, I think that's my biggest concern with them is like I still feel like they haven't. I mean, they got like I do think Melo is a good option here, but I don't think they've ever completely answered that question about who's gonna who's gonna get you a basket besides Dame or CJ. And
yeah,
I think the additions of Rocco, Derek Jones, those are like defense first additions. Um, I really like Derek Jones on the Heat. I'm like fine with him leaving um, because I think he's a little inconsistent. But in little bursts of minutes, he's just like such a high effort guy, gets a lot of offensive rebounds. Um, I mean, just jumps insanely high. Like always, like I hate to use these like cliches, but like he's like legitimately a very scrappy player who does win all those 50-50 balls. Like that's sort of what he was good at. And he was getting okay at the corner three. I wouldn't say great, but he was shooting it, which was nice. Maybe
I feel like
there.
if you,
I was just
I
gonna
feel
say.
like if you,
Oh yeah, you go.
sorry, no, you continue.
Okay. I was just gonna say. I think maybe their thought process. That's part of their thought process with Cantor is like, here's another guy who we can just go to and get a bucket. And again, in a playoff game, Cantor's probably going to play 15 minutes. In the first 8, he's going to get like 12 points and he's going to look awesome. And then they're going to score on him a million times and he's going to be taken out of the game.
Yes. But I think you had a good point about Derek Jones there, that just like he's a guy you can go to in a pinch who can provide something. Because like they got into pinches last year. Like they were running Wenyen Gabriel at Anthony Davis last year. Like this team has had problems with its depth. This team gets into pinches. So like just having a guy like a Derek Jones be your, I don't know, 8th, 9th player on the rotation, having an Enes Kanter, like they've shored up some of the margins in a way that I think is very exciting. And there's a possibility that Carmelo Anthony wins Sixth Man of the Year, which I'm now pulling for with all of my heart and soul.
Possible.
An enthusiastic yes. But yeah, so I think if we're looking at this in terms of what like the high and low could be, the low is Melo takes a step back. They don't have big defense outside of Nurk. Like Rocco kind of doesn't really gel with this team. Rodney Hood isn't physically what he used to be. Anthony Simons again doesn't see the court. Zach Collins has just kind of plateaued at what he is. Again, this is if everything goes wrong.
Yeah.
And they're, I don't know, like 6, 7 seed, like play-in team that gets stunned by I'm trying to think. Who were the teams that we said the ceiling was a play-in team for? Was it like they get stunned by like the Warriors?
Yeah.
Like this team feels like a team that would be susceptible to Steph's doing stuff game.
Mm. Yeah.
Um, so like that's the floor. I think the ceiling is probably like 3, 4, like near the front of that class of teams that are going to have some things break right to make a conference finals. But like 3, 4 seed, they wind up in a series with the Clippers and some things go right.
Yeah. I feel like they, I mean, this is going to be a weird comment to make, but I feel like they should have gone for like, because I know they didn't have a lot of money this offseason and they spent most of it on Rocco.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like they should have been in the conversations for like Brad Wanamaker or something.
Mm.
Like,
Yeah.
I mean, as much as we've like kind of
We
joked
spent a
about
lot
him,
of time on Brad.
yeah, he's a guy who would actually be a decent backup guard for them.
Yeah.
And I think that, when you look at this depth chart, that's what's sticking out the most is,
They don't have a playmaker.
yeah.
They simply don't. Um, so yeah, I mean, could be very good. Could also just be very unexciting. But
I've just come up with a trade idea.
oh, let's hear it. Live breaking NBA trade machine segment.
I'm trying to think how this would work. How about um, Kendrick Nunn to the Blazers
Yeah. This is actually interesting.
for let's go with Gary Trent and Zach Collins.
I feel like Portland's hanging up the phone pretty quickly.
Just Trent.
I think they would listen to that because like they don't really need much more in terms of spot up stuff. And from what I hear, like they really like Collins, which like I guess he's shown flashes of in the past couple of years, but at some point it is kind of put up or shut up. Um, but I think that would be interesting because like Miami, they know how to use guys like a Gary Trent, who it's just like he can cut any which way and get open for a three. None did not look playable for them last year, as you of all people would know very well as a Heat fan.
No, but
And
he is a good play. When he was good, he is a very good playmaker, and I think
yeah,
Nunn's. I don't want to get on a Nunn tangent, but I think his like ceiling at this point is probably that like sixth man playmaker type, and I think he can be very good at that.
yeah, yeah. He's a spark plug,
Yeah.
which is exactly what this team needs.
Yes.
Um, Now, moving from Portland to a team with a very different set of worries, you did a lot of research on the Pelicans for this episode. Tell me about what we're looking at with New Orleans.
So this was the toughest team to
Yeah.
predict. Just to start here, you got a starting or crunch time lineup of potentially Lonzo, JJ Redick, Ingram, Zion, and Steven Adams. You could potentially slide Zion down to the 5, Ingram down to the 4. You slide everyone down and you throw in Josh Hart or something.
Yeah.
But it's a weird team because you'd think that a guy like Zion would thrive with a lot of shooting around him, especially with his like sort of some of his limitations and with the fact that he really thrives in the fast break opportunities. You'd think that that should be your priority, but instead you get a tough big guy like Steven Adams, and you're really playing like, and this makes sense because their coach is now Stan Van Gundy. You're playing some old school kind of style here.
Oh, yeah.
We're looking at a lot of ISO ball with Ingram. We're looking at a team that might like play really fast, but also not be able to get a ton of threes up, which is an odd conundrum. Last year, they were the fastest team in the NBA. And Adams surely slows that down a little bit.
Just a little.
Um, there's some concerns. I can't find exactly where I wrote this.
May I just, while we're looking for that, I do have to ask, the practice reps of Zion and Steven Adams running against each other are going to be hilarious to me.
Oh yeah.
Like, I feel like it's going to be that scene in the Avengers where I forget which Marvel movie it was actually, but where Cap hits, where Thor hits Cap's shield with his hammer, and there's just like this wave of like concussive energy
Yeah.
that just radiates outward, and everyone just stops. Like, I feel like that's Steven Adams and Zion going up for rebounds against each other. Like, when they both come down, the gym shakes.
Yeah.
Like, it's a lot of beef in the front court.
It's a lot of beef, and this is not surprising. But
Yeah.
last year, their seven best lineups, seven best, all had Drew Holiday in them. By most metrics, Drew Holiday was their best player, both
Eesh.
on defense and probably second best on offense behind Ingram.
Yeah.
So you lost your best player.
Yeah.
You can't understate that. And what you're hoping for here is
Yeah.
you're hoping for a lot of things that haven't been consistent things to become consistent. For example, Ingram.
Mm-hmm.
He shot 39% last year on 6 attempts a game from 3 after a
Right.
lot of years of being a very poor shooter. This kind of came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Is that real? Lonzo also
Yeah.
shot well from 3 last year. Is that real? I have a tough time believing that it's real with Lonzo. Ingram, I have a little bit more faith
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
They also, not to spend too much time on Steven Adams, but they also extended Steven Adams.
Wait, really?
Yeah, they extended him for 2 years. So they want this. They
So they
want
have this
this.
year and then 2 years after this year.
It's 2 years after this year.
So they extended Steven Adams through Giannis or through Zion's rookie deal.
Yeah.
Basically.
So they want Zion
Funky.
next to Adams.
Yeah. Not the fit I
and
would have come up with, but okay.
now, look, Zion was really good last year,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
but he didn't play a lot.
Also true.
And I feel like he's still kind of an unknown commodity.
Yeah.
But there's a situation here where this team actually is really good. And
Mhm.
I do feel like a lot of it is predicated on sliding Adams out of the lineup.
Yeah.
And running some weird lineup of Lonzo or Bledsoe with Redick, Hart, Ingram, and Zion.
That would be scary. The scariest part of that would probably be when Adams tags in for Zion, and it's just like you're just going up against like the Dudley Boys or something, like just this very hard hitting tag team of centers that the Thunder can, or that the Pelicans can run at you, because that would be terrifying. Like, imagine if you're a Dallas and you get matched up with New Orleans in the first round of the playoffs, and it's like, all right, cool, we're good as long as they don't just hammer us down low.
Mm-hmm.
And then they just run Zion and Steven Adams at you for 48 minutes.
Yep. This is a team, in theory. Now, this is another team that I think watched the Lakers succeed and was like, we need to go big. And I really do think that's what they're thinking of. They're thinking of, like, obviously they didn't know what the Lakers were doing, but now we have a situation where Steven Adams is in there to box out Marc Gasol in a Lakers series, or Montrezl Harrell. Like, he's in there for those purposes, I think. So, Tom, the Pelicans have 7 guys that I like.
Tell me about it.
It's Lonzo,
Okay.
Redick,
Okay.
Ingram, Zion,
Yeah.
Steven Adams,
Yeah.
Josh Hart,
Yeah.
Eric Bledsoe,
Yeah.
and Jackson Hayes.
I like all those guys.
Yeah, they're all pretty good. The problem is that I don't understand how these players fit together.
there's the rub. I don't have an answer for you. I'll start that right now. I think Reddick is probably the most seamless fit next to Zion that this team has. Um, Ingram does this fun thing where anytime you tune in to watch a nationally televised Pelicans game, you wind up leaving being like, wow, Brandon Ingram looked good tonight. Like he's good. He needs the ball in his hands a lot, which is tough because so does Zion. Um, I almost wonder if Steven Adams isn't out there just because they saw Lakers' success and were like, we need to have a big that we can go with. Like I'm assuming they're paying him too much to not play him a lot, but I do think like there's a world where they say, okay, we would like to go Zion at the 5, but we have Adams there if we need to go to him. Like we have Adams there if we run into a Jokic or if we run into a Nurk.
Yeah.
Um,
and I guess that's a good thing to have.
Yeah, it's just a move you can have. You have it in your bag.
It's a weird fit with these other guys. A lot of guards who can't shoot.
Yeah.
Some weird mix of vets between guys like Bledsoe and Adams versus guys like Lonzo and Ingram. And ultimately, I find them to be the most difficult team to find a floor or ceiling of.
Yeah.
Because, look, there's a world where Zion takes some leap to be a top 15 player.
It's possible. Like it's terrifying, but it's possible.
And if that happens, then they're going to be probably like a top 6 or 7 seed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But if that doesn't happen and this fit looks awful, and just, their defense outside of the guard position is pretty much non-existent,
could get ugly.
Yeah, then it might get bad, and we're looking at a play-in team, I think. So I'd say that's what the floor and ceiling are.
That's good though. Like ultimately, a team with a lot to be excited about.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if they went 5th or 11th this year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very good way to wrap it up. Just like there's variance, and we don't really know what this team is going to look like, and until we do, it's hard to predict. Now, one team that we do know what they're going to look like is the Dallas Mavericks. It's Luka, and it's I talk about the Mavericks like they're Hank Hill. He sells propane and propane accessories. The Mavericks are Luka and Luka accessories. Like it's like Porzingis is there to run like pick and pop or pick and roll with Luka. Dwight Powell is there to set screens for Luka and dive to the rim. Josh Richardson is there to defend the guards that Luka can't defend. Seth Curry was there to shoot if Luka passes on the ball. Now that role is just going to be like Dorian Finney-Smith, Tim Hardaway Jr., Maxi Kleber. Like it's
Trey Burke.
Yeah, Trey Burke is going to get some minutes this year. Like it's just a lot of players that can help Luka. It's exciting. I think the thing that I was looking at with this team is like really their biggest X factor might actually just be Luka, because like we saw that final stretch against the Clippers last year. I forget which game it was in that first round series, but he carried the load. Like every possession coming down the stretch, it was Luka bringing the ball up, initiating the offense, usually taking the shot. So like he can be probably a top 10 player in the league, and it's just a matter of what everyone else can do around him. Now, let's talk about what's around him for a sec. Luka is obviously going to be running the show. You're probably going to have some combination of like Tim Hardaway Jr. You'll have 2 of Hardaway Jr., Dorian Finney-Smith, and Josh Richardson on the court with him most of the time, probably. I don't think Porzingis is going to be healthy right away, so we're probably going to have Maxi Kleber and Dwight Powell starting up front. You could potentially, I think, try and run like a Dorian Finney-Smith up at the 4, but that's going to be very dicey. So yeah, it'll probably be Luka, Hardaway Jr., Dorian, Kleber, and Dwight Powell for the time being. Obviously, you'd slide. What's up?
Do we know if is he healthy yet?
That's a good question, actually. I would hope he is, because if he isn't, then my prediction for their starting 5 is up in the vicinity of smoke. Let's see. Mavericks prepared to start the regular season with Dwight. The headline cuts off there. With Dwight Powell, but without Kristaps, according to the Dallas Sports Fanatic. So they'll have him. I think obviously there is a question of, is this more of a 2-year injury or like an 18-month injury? It was a torn Achilles, which are not easy to come back from. But they'll have him. So I think their starting lineup is probably some combination of that. I think the big question for this team is honestly just, for as long as he's there, is going to be, can Porzingis stay healthy? Like, is there a world where his health is not a huge concern? We were talking about it when we got on this call. Like, you really only need, like, if you get one postseason where he stays healthy for the whole thing, that could be enough to get you into a championship scenario, or like a championship series at least. But we don't know. Like, that's a very unknown commodity there.
I'd like to see this team pick up some wings, maybe. I'm looking at it now, and after the Richardson, Hardaway, Finney-Smith trio, you really just have Wes Iwundu, who's like pretty decent role player on the Magic these last couple of years. But after that, there's really no one besides like their camp guys, their camp invites who are on the roster as forwards. Which kind of worries me defensively and makes me wonder.
Me as well.
What this bench even looks like. It almost looks like they're only going to play like 7 guys. Like, I can't even tell.
They're going to be a short rotation for sure.
Probably get some James Johnson out there.
Oh, yeah.
James Johnson, when he was with the Heat, played a lot of...
A literal plug and play.
Yeah. When he was with the Heat, played a lot of point forward. So I think you might see him do some things like that with this team. It's always funny, like, just a quick aside, but someone did this video of like showing how Spo was actually putting James Johnson in a lot of plays that he had LeBron run.
LeBron facsimile James Johnson.
Yeah.
Scout team Bron.
But yeah, he's a capable playmaker for a big guy.
Okay. That's good.
So I think you might end up seeing a lot of him. Did they sign Willie Cauley-Stein this offseason, or has he been there? I can't remember.
I think they got him this offseason. I think it was a king up until this past year, or up until now. But like another piece, I don't really know what he's like at this point.
Yeah.
I think if things go well for this team, they're probably like they're middle seed, like 4, 5, 6, but very scary. Like, long second round series that they could potentially win against a Clippers or a Nuggets or a Jazz. I don't know about if they beat the Lakers, but like, they have a player who can be the best player on the court in that series, which is something that like basically every team except them and maybe the Bucks can't really say. Like maybe the Nets, Rocket, like they have a player who's in that tier that puts them in contention with LA.
Yeah.
I think the floor is probably just Kristaps is not playing often. Like, he's nicked up all year. They're just going to get hammered by bigs on other teams. I mean, we just talked about that with the Pelicans, and like the West is kind of loaded with centers every year. Like, whether it's Gobert, whether it's Jokic, the Lakers, like, they have AD and they don't even need to play him at center. They'll bring out Marc Gasol and Montrez. Like, they've got size, and the Mavs are just kind of playing like they're not punting on their bigs, obviously, but they're playing like we're fine getting beaten on the boards style, because our strength is going to be in our playmaker.
Mm-hmm. That's the weird thing about
the floor for them is.
Mm-hmm.
No, go for it.
I was just gonna say that's the weird thing about their bigs is that they've kind of cobbled together this group of guys that are actually, I think, pretty decent, and like Powell and Kleber. But yeah, neither of them are very good
Yeah,
rebounders, and it's just kind of just
they
peculiar.
are. They do have like complementary skill sets, though. I feel like
Mm.
where it's like Powell is very much your rim runner slash protector. Kleber is kind of a below the rim. He can pick and pop, and then Porzingis is like the best of both worlds almost at his best.
Yeah,
Like we were saying this before we started recording, but like his best defensive asset has always just been like weak side shot blocker who can come crashing across the paint and swat something. But he's more a shot blocker than like a defensive anchor, if that makes sense. So like I don't know, maybe you hope to pick up someone who can be that, but also I don't know who's going to be that. Who's going to be available that can give you that skill set. But if they ride with what they have now, they could be a very scary team in the playoffs. I think like ceiling is conference finals team, floor is probably a 6 or 7 seed, gets bounced in round one because they just don't have the horses to go up with another team.
yeah, similar to this
Um,
year.
yeah, exactly. Like the floor for this team is just staying as good as they were.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of teams staying as good as they were, I want to ask you about the Memphis
Mm.
Grizzlies. They were almost a playoff team last year.
They
They
were.
crumbled down. Well, yeah, they were a play-in tournament team, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like they crumbled a little bit down the stretch. They're a young team though, but they were in the picture for a second there. What do we think it looks like this year for the Grizzlies? Do we think that that was an overachieve, or do we think that that was just what this team is going to be going forward?
Hard to say, but I lean towards it being an overachieve. I don't think we should be expecting a any sort of leap.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think last year was an overachieve, and I feel like they're similar this year. And you can the only way they can get better is through internal growth.
Yeah,
That's it. They didn't
yeah,
add any big pieces, so you're just betting on Ja getting better, Jaren Jackson getting better, Brandon Clark getting better. I mean,
yeah.
they only added Mario Hazonia and Gorgie Jang,
Okay.
which, I mean, Hazonia is getting close to his last stops, I think.
He's been around a while. Actually, how old is Mario? He's been around the league. Hang on, let me see this.
24, I'm going to guess.
Mario?
Yeah. Or 20, or he might be way younger, actually.
He is. Oh, he's 25. Wow.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
He feels like he's been around for a decade.
So I don't know if they're just. I mean, those off-season moves make me think um, that they're just betting on the guys they got. They
Yeah.
drafted Desmond Bain, who a lot of people like, um, but I mean, I was just looking at some of their lineups last year. Um, a possible crunch time lineup for them, which just feels likely,
Mm-hmm.
is John Morant, Dylan Brooks, Kyle Anderson, Brandon Clark, and Jaren Jackson Jr.
Yeah.
Per 100 possessions last year, this lineup was minus 11.9.
Wow.
Not very good.
No, that's worse than I thought that would be.
Yeah,
Like I can see where there would be defensive concerns with that, but 11-point difference. Eee.
yeah. Um, Now, the biggest downgrade when you look at their lineups last year and this year is that a lot of their best lineups last year had Jay Crowder in them. Um, and the guy they got for Jay Crowder, Justice Winslow, seems to never, he will just never be healthy. I
It's not easy.
Yeah, I feel bad for him. I like him a lot.
Yeah.
I was pretty high on him with the Heat, but I don't think it's really going to work out. Um, Not to like say it can't. It's just that he really hasn't been able to stay healthy for his
Yeah, just
entire
going off what you've
career.
seen.
for more than like 25 games at a time.
Yeah.
So what can you rely on there?
Yeah. What's there to bet on? So do you think this team is kind of just caught in the middle a bit? Like we aren't contending right now, but our path to getting to a contending spot is just hope people get better.
Yeah. And
Okay.
my hot take here is that I would sooner rather than later maybe see what's out there for Jaren Jackson. Um,
Interesting. Okay. Now, what do you think the reasoning behind that is? Because I feel like we've talked about this, but for the people that haven't heard our discussions.
yeah, no, Tom and I have talked about this because we have both done Memphis Grizzlies NBA 2K rebuilds.
Oh yeah,
We were doing one around the same
extensive
time,
rebuilds.
and I think we both ran into the issue of like, how good is Jaren Jackson going to be?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and the thing is, the way they kind of use him is like pretty much as like a shooter. Like
Yeah.
he's an elite shooter for someone his size. He was actually seventh in the entire league in points per game and catch and shoots last year, which is just crazy for a big man.
Yeah. Like a young one too.
Yeah, but as elite as he is as a shooter, his rebounding and defense leaves so much to be desired for someone his size.
No.
He has not. I think he got worse as a rebounder over the last couple of years, last 2 years. Um, and his defense, he's shown flashes here and there of being able to guard on the perimeter, but it's really nothing.
Yeah.
It's nothing to really hang your hat on.
Okay.
Another reason I think you should look at Jaren Jackson and send him off, is because I think the second best player on this team um, is probably going to be, and was last year and is going to be this year, Brandon Clark.
Yes.
Brandon Clark
I
is
think I
really
think it will
good.
be Brandon Clark. I think Dylan Brooks thinks it's Dylan Brooks.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, it probably should be Brandon Clark.
Based on the amount of shots that Dylan Brooks takes a game, he thinks it's him.
Yeah, exactly. And
Um,
just the selection there is very. I am the best player on this court.
yeah.
So
To get it,
there's.
yeah. So there's a weird positional overlap here
Yeah.
with two of your better players, and Clark looks better.
Yeah.
If to just get into some of the analytic stats for them last year, he
Yeah.
was second in win shares on the team. He was first in box plus minus,
Wow.
and he was second in value over replacement player.
So he's not a good like.
He's
He's making something go.
Yeah, and a lot of their lineups with Clark out there and without Jaren Jackson are good
Yeah.
lineups.
Oh.
Um, so we have this weird situation here where two of your better young players play the same
Hmm.
position, and the
Hmm.
lineups out there when they're playing together, when you have the Clark Jaren Jackson combo, are some of the
Not good.
worst lineups.
Oh boy.
So it feels like a Sabonis Turner situation in the making.
Where
Um,
like eventually they're gonna come to a crossroads.
yeah. Although Sabonis and Turner are both, I think, work together a lot better than these two do.
Okay.
Um, Still have Jonas Valanciunas on this team.
Oh yeah.
Feel like he could be moved maybe
Yeah.
to a contender who wants a Cantor type big man off the bench who
Yeah.
can get you 10 points a game.
It's possible. I mean, I don't know. We've talked about Dallas. We've talked about Phoenix. I feel like both of those teams would benefit greatly from having a Jonas on their team.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, I think you have something there with him being movable.
Um, Ja is great. I don't want to
Obviously,
not talk about him.
love him.
He, by so many measures, in his rookie year, he was one of the best playmakers in the NBA. I mean, it's just absurd, and he was only getting
Yeah.
better. He was
Yeah.
better in the bubble than he was in the regular season.
Jesus.
So, like, the sky's the limit for Ja. I think he's going to be great. But there's not enough shooting
Yeah.
around Ja on this team.
Yeah.
The rest of the team is just this very weird mismatch of guys who I think the Grizzlies fans would all say they play really hard out there.
Mm. They're solid
Um,
role players.
yeah, and I just don't think a ceiling of a team that is throwing out Ja, Dylan Brooks, Anderson, Brandon Clark, and Valanciunas or Jackson is going to be very high. There's just too many
Yeah.
holes there. You got a lot of
Yeah.
offensive zeros there. Like I love Clark, but he's not an offensive threat really outside of cutting or in being in
Yeah.
the fast break.
Yeah, you kind of need to create the offense for him. Like it's
Yeah.
not something he's going to facilitate on his own.
Yeah. So
So where do you think this team goes this year? Like what do you
So-
think the high and low could be?
so I didn't do a floor and a ceiling for them because I feel very confident that they're going to be in the 10th or the 11th spot. So
I see.
if you want, you can say the 10th is their ceiling and the 11th is their floor. But I just
Okay.
I could also see a situation where they're a lot worse than this.
Mhm.
To be completely honest, I know that goes back to
Okay.
what I just said, but
Yeah.
you know, Minnesota has more talent than them in theory, so maybe they end up higher.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a rough. I don't know what they're doing. What like
Yeah.
are they rebuilding? Are they trying to? I almost think their thought process here was like we overachieved last year and almost got that 8th seed, so obviously we have to run it back.
Yeah. Like it was like they overachieved themselves. They overachieved to a fall.
Yeah,
Where it's like now we are actually kind of caught too close to the middle, which is not where you want to be because you're staring down the barrel of the Lakers.
yeah.
If everything goes right, you're looking at 4 games against LA.